Hey guys, Quantum here, and today is the release for Ursula's Return. It is Friday, May 17th, and before all those singles hit the marketplace, I just wanted to do a quick review on the previous three sets as to kind of what's moving in the market right now, because the meta is going to shape up in the first 2 weeks. We're probably going to have a couple of online tournaments, obviously, some big in-person tournaments, of course, as well. But where are the existing cards from the first three sets kind of headed? So the first thing I want to take a look at is Ursula, Deceiver of All. Just like we mentioned many times before on previous market watches, this is a card that's just going to continue its trajectory upwards, in my opinion, because as more sets come out, we get more and more powerful 3-cost songs. This card just becomes even better. What we've seen with Ursula's Return is Emerald probably being the best ink color in the game, which is a stark contrast to where we were in the first three sets, where Amethyst was, I think, the clear winner, and Steel was a very close second in terms of the best ink colors. Now you're seeing all of those very isolated, powerful Emerald cards being able to be used in the Emerald package with other ink colors, mainly Steel and Amethyst, in order to help synergize and just build off the incredible advantage. So in isolation, Ursula, Deceiver of All is an incredibly powerful card, but you compare it with any ink color with 3-cost or lower songs, and it just, the value you get off of this thing is insane, right? People will splash Emerald just to play a card like this. So this card is one to watch. It will likely continue to go up, especially now that Into the Inklands is no longer the set that is, the latest set. So will stock go down? Will it still be available? Time will tell. Next up is Morph. I talked about this as well in the previous set, but another generic card that just gets better over time. Another one of those very powerful Emerald cards that, it just has so much utility, as Floodborns are never going to go away, right? We're always going to have Floodborns. And so another very powerful Emerald card that's splashable with any ink combination, depending on what Floodborns you want to play. What I will say, and I hope we don't go this route, is there may be floodgates introduced into this game. So you can't play characters under cost 2 or something. We might not get there for a long time, but that's something that could really shift what the metagame looks like. But this is a card that I think will also continue to go up. If we take a look at the 1 month chart here, it is trickling up slightly. People buying out the foil versions, interestingly enough. That's also what's on the recent sales. Because this card is being played, right? Just like I told you guys it would many sets ago. And it will continue to be played because it's just a very good generic card. Moving on, Cursed Merfolk. Again, another one I told you to pick up when it was around $1, right? And it's been going up. I told you that this was going to be a staple Emerald 1-drop. What's interesting is as you move into set 4 and as we continue to see more sets being released, I think this becomes less and less of a staple. So, it's getting really hyped up and bought out now. It's only $3 for a copy, but it's a stark contrast to when it was under $1 when I was telling you guys this card is just going to go up from here. But depending on your ink pairing with Emerald, this card may or may not be played. Obviously, if you're in a discard package, you play this, and that's why it's going up, is because the discard packages right now look to be very, very popular with Emerald, whether you're pairing it with Amethyst, Steel, or even Amber now. So this card, again, just represents tremendous value, and in terms of its ability its abilities in the metagame, and so it will likely just stabilize at around. I can't see this getting more than $3 a copy in USD, but that's almost $5 Canadian, which is ridiculous. $20 for a playset when you could have got them for $2 each, less than $8. So it's definitely spiked up over 100% from where it was before. The Queen's Castle, as Amethyst and especially Ruby Amethyst kind of trickles down in popularity, you're seeing this card on the decline. This is probably the most powerful location in the game, and I think Ravensburger, if you've seen the location design in set 4, realized that giving good abilities on locations with passive lore gain was probably too strong, even though these cards really didn't do they didn't do what you would expect a very powerful card to do in the metagame. It didn't absolutely shift the entire metagame. But what's interesting is if you've ever played against locations, once they establish a location, if they're already in a good state, the game is basically over, right? Because you can't deal with the location and the characters on board at the same time. So these things are almost like closers, right? If you think about what McDuck Manor did for the Sapphire decks, right? It was post Be Prepared, I have a McDuck Manor still, so I'm still gaining lore, right? Because you use your tempo, you use your turn to cast the Be Prepared. And so that follow-up that these locations with passive lore give you were just too strong. And so that's why you've seen further locations in set 4 being developed without this 2 lore. Some of them have 1 lore still, but their abilities are far less powerful. But I think you will continue to see that trend unless they want locations to power creep in the game again. But yeah, this card still represents, if you're playing Amethyst, a very, very powerful effect with passive lore gain. So if you don't have them, keep an eye on this as they continue to trickle down to the lowest point that they've ever been. Next up, along came Zeus. Again, another generically powerful steel song. This card, again, kind of at its lowest point. It might be trickling back up. Nope, okay. And again, this card, not really played in a playset of 4, so it probably doesn't spike back up unless we see that the deal 5 damage be super relevant. But really, because you're kind of aiming at dealing with things that are a little bit lower to the ground, like 2 toughness, 3 toughness, this card doesn't really represent that much value. But again, a generically powerful steel song that, as we get more and more ways to sing 4 and higher cost songs, becomes more and more useful. So for example, Floodborn shifting and or singers on the amber side. So keep an eye on this card if you don't have them. Mim Foxes, really spiked up on the foil versions here, and really surprised to see that the just regular uncommon version has kind of, it's a little bit on the downward trend here, but it definitely is higher than I would expect it to be. Again, this is a card that was in a starter deck, but it's still in contention for one of the strongest Amethyst cards in the game. Unfortunately, Ursula's Return didn't do too much for Amethyst. In fact, there were almost no good cards in all of Amethyst from this whole set, which is remarkable in my opinion. Again, that might change over time. We'll see how the metagame develops, but on initial review, it doesn't look like Amethyst is doing too much with Ursula's Return. You're pretty much just playing the old Amethyst cards, and obviously this is one of them, and one of the best ones as well, from Rise of the Floodborn, the second set. So this card just becomes harder and harder to find, and I think the price hopefully doesn't go up too much, but another one to keep an eye on. I mean, everybody should have these if you're playing the game, so keep an eye on those if you don't. Rabbit is also probably on a downward trend. Again, it's Amethyst, really kind of falls off a little bit in terms of its like dominant force in the metagame. We're seeing Emerald kind of take over, at least in the beginning. That might shift, but Rabbit, honestly, if you've been playing the game a little bit with the new cards, it feels a little slow now, which is crazy to say, right? Because, you know, you play it, you draw a card, but yeah, you're using your whole turn to play an underwhelming character to draw that card. In a slower metagame, this card was super strong, right? Because it generated you advantage as well as putting a body on board, and then when it leaves play, it also gave you a card. But in a faster metagame, cards like this are a little bit at a detriment. So the uncommon Flynn Rider from set 1 is pushing up higher than most rares and super rares even in the game right now, because again, Emerald is one of the colors that a lot of people are gravitating towards and wanting to play because it's very simple. It's well, I shouldn't say very simple. It's definitely can be complicated if you want to play it the right way, but it is very powerful, and Flynn Rider is one of your ideal 2-drops for that deck, any Emerald deck, depending on how you build it, because the 2-drop slot is very competitive. You have Ursula, Deceiver of All, the one that rips the song. Sorry, that's just Ursula Deceiver. Deceiver of All is the singer. You have Morph as a 2-cost character, and depending on what you're pairing it with, right, with Amethyst, you have Mim Snake. With Steel, you have Mr. Smee, right? So depending on what you're using, you may or may not use Flynn Riders if you're focusing on discard or not, you know, with kind of packages and combos. But again, a card that is definitely worth, like it's not worth this much in my opinion, but I mean, this is what the market rate is going for, so I don't think it should be worth that much at all, but it is what it is. Fishbone Quill kind of dipped down, but as people start to adapt their Emerald Ruby lists, or kind of realize that Emerald Ruby is a color that can contend in the metagame, they are on the slight upward trend here. Again, a first chapter card that just gets harder to find over time. They're kind of stabilized around $5 a piece USD right now. I think that's a fair price. I remember when this was $250 Canadian prior to the Hiram, people like realizing that Hiram was good. Yeah, that was interesting, but I don't think we'll ever see that again with Fishbone Quill unless this card gets power crept in the next set or future sets. Grab Your Swords. I think this card is undervalued for where it is right now. In my testing, it seems like the low-cost removal, again, because Emerald is so popular, is pretty strong. I could be wrong. We'll see how the metagame shifts, but I think that if you don't have these, or you were waiting to pick them up, they're basically at the lowest point that they've ever been. I picked up extra copies myself, but I think this card does represent tremendous value. It hasn't really been power crept yet. Again, that 5 cost being able to be sung by something like Robin Hood, Beast Tragic Hero, etc. is very relevant. And just wiping away things like Diablos, Flynn Riders, Curse Merfolk, and then, you know, any other color combination as well, like the 1-drops, 2-drops, etc., is very strong to slow down aggro and like just give you a tremendous advantage. Grab Your Swords is becoming more and more of a tempo swinging card. I mean, it always was, but it's become even more relevant now when you can like potentially wipe out a board or deal with 2 or 3 characters on a board, finish off characters, prevent, you know, a Beast Tragic Hero draw, that kind of thing, all still relevant in the metagame. Maui also was on a bit of a decline. Again, as we see Ruby Amethyst kind of fall off, the demand for this card will likely go down. Ruby Sapphire is probably the premier Ruby deck now, and this card is used in 4 ofs on that as well. But, you know, this card will likely just go back up over time because it's a first chapter card, and it's still a very, very powerful card. Ruby Amethyst, I think, will eventually come back. Like, there's no way that they make 2 sets, like the next set after this one, with no good Amethyst cards, kind of like what they did here. So keep an eye on this. Ruby is still a very powerful color. As steel becomes very prevalent in the metagame, Ruby is one of the colors that counter steel, right? This is one of the cards that helps you deal over like the resist and things like that steel has. So very, very powerful card still. Rafiki is, if you're playing Amethyst, still kind of your premier 1-drop in Amethyst, unfortunately. But yeah, we're seeing this card kind of stabilize around the $2 mark. So again, if you don't have them, I don't really see this going too much lower, because if you're playing Amethyst, this is really one of your best 1-drop choices, and it's a rare, and now it's just going to get harder and harder to find over time. Ariel Singer from Chapter 1, Spectacular Singer. I think this card is at a good place. I think, like I mentioned before, with these generically good cards, this is a very powerful card for Amber. If you're playing Amber with songs, obviously, whether it's Steel or any other ink combination, you want 4 of these. And at around $4 USD or less, I think that's still a good value, especially as this card becomes harder and harder to find. It's a very powerful card, probably one of the most powerful Amber cards in the game still. So yeah, if you don't have your playset, take a look. A Whole New World has really dropped off. Of all the steel decks, Amethyst Steel probably doesn't play this anymore. Amethyst Steel is a really awkward place. I haven't really reviewed that deck too much yet, but maybe in another video. Amber Steel Song obviously would still play this. Emerald Steel does not play this, and Sapphire Steel probably still plays this. In my version, I've tested it without this, and it worked pretty well. The main reason why this card almost gets countered is because, again, the Diablo. If the Diablo is on the field and you Whole New World, you draw 7 cards, they draw 7 cards as well. So they're going to draw 7 for the Whole New World, 7 for the Diablo. They're going to have 14 cards in their hand. So, you know, obviously you don't play this if they have a Diablo. You make sure you out the Diablo first before you play this. But this card just becomes a little bit more clunky now with the Diablo on field, because now there are conditions that you have to fulfill in order to play this properly. Steel Song can do that, no problem, right? They just sing a Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, whatever, out the Diablo, cast the Whole New World, and they get their advantage. But other decks might have trouble doing multiple actions in one turn, so you're seeing this card kind of dip back down as those steel decks focusing on a Whole New World kind of phase a little bit out of the meta. I think this card is, it's on the upward trend. Wow, I didn't expect that. But yeah, I think this card was actually underrated. And I've already picked up my playset, but if this card is going for under like around $8 to $10 Canadian or under 10 USD, I would think that's a pretty good value. It's a legendary. Having a playset for any Amber deck that you want to play low to the ground. The ability, there are certain things that you can use to combo with this. For example, using this with like Madame Medusa, the new Sisu, that new Emerald Song, I think that puts cards back to the bottom of the deck if they're under a certain strength. Like, there are a lot of interesting combos with this card, as well as just being an inherently decent ability for like an aggro strategy. A lot of interesting utility that I think will probably go unexplored, but you know, if somebody does pick this up and do some work with it, it could be pretty interesting. Interesting to see that it is on the upward trend, though. People are definitely interested in this card, and yeah, I would just keep an eye on it if you are interested in playing Amber or any kind of interesting deck that's kind of maybe not directly in the meta right now. Be Prepared's on the decline. This is very interesting. We've really seen a lot of anti-Be Prepared tech, which is a little disappointing from my perspective. Like, this is a card that I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but it does seem pretty balanced. I mean, a 7 on Inkable Song, yes, banish all characters. Like, you have to play around this, but it uses up a lot of resources on the opponent's side, right? They banish their characters. If they sing it, yes, it can be a little bit stronger, but using it on 7 ink, like, you know, I'm happy when I get Be Prepared if my opponent paid 7 ink to cast this, because then I just redevelop my board. Like, I don't play into the Be Prepared, right, if I know it's coming. But this card is kind of phasing out. Less and less copies are being played in some decks, Scars substituting it, because people are afraid of the Emerald discards, right? This is a dead card in your hand for the first couple of turns, and if you're getting aggro discarded, like, it's a dead card, right? And, you know, it gets ripped by Ursula Deceiver. It's a rough card, so it's on the decline as it kind of not necessarily phases out of the meta, but has a little bit, yes, less utility. Tamatoa, I think this card, if it's under like, yeah, okay, it's gone up a little bit, but you know, under $4, I think this is still a decent value. This is a card that if you're playing anything Sapphire, I think you have to play this because it's so item focused, and we're getting a lot of decent items for Sapphire. Even in my Sapphire Steel deck, I put 4 Tamatoas in there, and I think I posted a video where I showed just like how insane the Tamatoa is in that deck. And then if you go up against anything Steel, like Tamatoa is just like a tank, right? So any Sapphire deck, I think, will play Tamatoa. And if you don't have these and you plan to play Sapphire, you definitely will want them. Keep an eye on it. I do imagine that this trickles back up as we see Sapphire, or if Sapphire becomes a force in the meta. I hope Emerald decks don't become too oppressive. And, you know, that's all we see, kind of like what we saw with Ruby Amethyst and Rise of the Floodborn's meta. But we'll wait and see, because an aggro strategy, obviously this costs 8. You know, if you're getting aggroed out, you're not going to ever have time to play this. And this is what I was talking about in my other videos, where I said, you know, Ravensburger really needs to introduce a lot of anti-aggro tech, because too many people are focusing on that low to the ground strategy, and it makes like half of the game unplayable, right? It makes cards that cost a ton unplayable if you're just constantly getting aggroed out, right? So you need more cards to deal with aggro, because again, you can't just have like 2 or 3 cards. You need to see those cards, and then, you know, by that point it's too late. You know, it's hopefully you're following me here. But, you know, in order to make the game a little bit more diverse, we need to make sure that there's, you know, good checks to everything in the metagame. Madame Medusa is flatlined here. Very powerful card if you're playing Ruby, but like I've already explained, Ruby's kind of in a weird place right now. We'll wait and see how it develops, but overall, I think if you don't have these, picking them up for around $1 is not a bad choice at all. Prince John is likely on the rise because, like I said, anything Emerald right now is picking up in price as, you know, there's a lot of different variations, and Emerald looks to be the strongest ink color. From the worst ink color in Chapter 1 to now the best ink color potentially in Ursula's Return in just 4 sets. That's what a couple of very powerful cards can do. But yeah, I think this card just continues to go up because, again, it is a Rise of the Floodborn, I believe, card, right? This came out Rise of the Floodborn. So it's getting harder and harder to find, but if you're on discard, this is probably one of the things you continue to play. What I will say, though, is between the Diablo and the Prince John, I think the Diablo is stronger, and they're both 3-cost uninkable characters. Yes, the Diablo can shift, but that might cause the Prince John to shift out of the meta because you'd rather just play Diablo, and you don't want to have 2 cards that are 3-cost uninkables in that 3-cost slot for your Emerald decks. So this card could go up, it could go down. It depends on how much people value the draw off of this with the discard packages, or just draw cards with Diablo, right? The bare necessities: if Emerald Amber becomes a deck, you know, this is a discard. So Prince John with anything else like this feeds into that Emerald discard deck. I've talked about this before. This card is insanely powerful. If you don't have your copies, I would pick them up. They're probably on the uptick. No, they're okay, a little bit up and down. But I mean, I picked up a couple of extra copies for under $1. It does seem like they're over that. They're approaching $1.50, a little bit more than that USD. So, you know, definitely, I think this card should be worth like $4 probably. Like it's that good in my opinion. It's a game-winning card when you know how to play it correctly. Like knowing when to cast this so that not only can you remove the threat that you're playing around, or know that you now no longer have to play around that threat. Using this card at the right time, like it's such a good card for Amber. Strength of a Raging Fire. Again, as Emerald Steel looks to be one of the strongest decks right now in the metagame, this is one of the cards that is played because of the Ursula, Deceiver of All. So it has kind of trickled back up. I do see this card being relevant for a while. It's tough to say that this should be worth $5, but I guess that's what it's going for because it is a very versatile and very powerful card. Like the ability for Ursula, Deceiver of All to sing this, deal 3 damage to 2 different threats by like turn 4 and wipe out your board. Like, and if your opponent has like, you know, a good curve like Merfolk 1, Flynn Rider 2, Ursula, Deceiver of All 3, sing this out your board turn 4. That's like that. The game's over by turn 4, right? So, you know, that's why these things are really, really strong and why they're kind of worth what they are. Cinderella trickled up a little bit. It was around $2, I think, in one of my market watches a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned like, you know, this is just a generically very powerful card, a 1-cost Singer 3, play a 3-cost song on turn 2, like insanely strong for any Amber deck. So again, if you don't have them, keep an eye on them because, I mean, they come down a little bit, and they seem to be coming down again, which is interesting. But yeah, for around like under $4, I would definitely pick them up. for sure. Like it's tremendous value in my opinion. Next up, Jafar. This is one that I called wrong, but I do think, well, actually, oh, it's actually come back up. Oh no, these are foil versions that are being, okay, yeah. Non-foils are being sold for 10. I thought this card should stabilize around 25 bucks Canadian, maybe up to $30, and it's definitely come down to like way less than that. What I will say is, looking at the metagame of Ursula's Return, I do think Jafar, Striking Illusionist, is potentially a deck type that you could play to some success, because you do pair this with Steel, and just being able to use those Steel songs to out a lot of the Emerald threats while maintaining card draw to counter the discard might be a good anti-meta call. Well, we'll see what happens with this card, but you know, it's at basically the lowest point it's ever been at, and I still think this is a fantastic card. We've seen this deck type have success, and it is one of the counters to Emerald, right? Amethyst Steel. So the Jafar build around, I think, is still relevant if you wanted an off-meta pick. Unfortunately, you still do need the Steel cards, which are very expensive, but you know, this card being worth not that much is pretty interesting. Next up, Robin Hood. Again, as Emerald Steel and you know, a number of different Steel variants continue to show to be very powerful in the metagame, Robin Hood will likely maintain its value. It's literally flatlined. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, it dipped down a little bit here, but yeah, it's going to maintain its value for sure, guys. I can't see this card going down anytime soon unless it gets, again, power crept. But if you're playing Steel, I think you absolutely play the Robin Hood package. It's just that strong. I've already explained many times why it is. Cinderella is an interesting one here. It is expensive. You don't play this in too many Steel decks, but again, if you're on Emerald Steel, you can shift this on a Morph. It's ink at worst. In Amber Steel, this card is very powerful as just being that big body that just deals with other Steel decks. Like, they have no answer to this thing. So you know, $2 for a non-foil. I think when this came out, this was pushing like 25, and it was ridiculous. Like, it was definitely not worth that. But it's probably at the lowest point it's ever been, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, if you were looking at this card for a long time, you know, it might be worth jumping on it if it's under or around $2 a piece. That's insane value in my opinion. It's still a very strong card. Belle, Strange but Special. Again, another Sapphire card similar to Tamatoa, that if you're playing Sapphire, I think you still play this. The new Ariel that came out for Sapphire, the super rare that also has like 5 lore if you have more items than your opponent. Yes, that is a good card, but the versatility of Belle being inkable and being able to ink as well to not offset, but like utilize that extra draw you get off Hieroms, off of Beast Tragic Hero if you're playing that, or off Whole New Worlds if you're still playing that, is still very valuable. But just the versatility of it being able to be inked without a Fishbone Quill, and being able to be played on 4, you know, for multiple interactions in a turn if you're on that Sapphire ramp, is more relevant than the Ariel. So I do think that this card will remain more of a relevant card than the Ariel. So yeah, $25. I think that's fairly decent for this card. It actually might be at one of its lowest points ever. No, it was, wow, it was down to, wow, okay, that's, whoa. Never would have thought this card would be down to close to $10, but yeah, it trickled back up, and I don't see it going that low again. But yeah, $25 I think is a decent value for Belle. Lucky Dimes have kind of come down, I imagine, as well. Okay, no, they've come back up, and then they've come back down. Okay, that's fair. Again, any Sapphire deck, you're playing 2 of this, so not a 4 of, but anything around $10 for Lucky Dime I think is a fair value. Rapunzel, I think this card, has it gone back up? Let's see, where is it at overall? I think this card goes back up. Because anything Amber, you're playing Rapunzel again, I think. So Amber Ruby, Amber Steel, which are, I think, well, maybe you don't play it in Amber Emerald, but I think you probably could too, even. Just an overall very, very strong card. The reason that this is so good, again, is because it's immediate impact. It's not a slow card. You play this, like, there are, as there are more ways to damage and leave damage on characters now, right? This card, like, the odds that you have a character with damage, or you can damage a character or whatever, challenge, get a spell off, whatever, and then you just play this and get the draw right away. Like, it's just more relevant. Yes, it was good in set 1. It kind of phased out in set 2, a little bit in set 3, kind of came back. But overall, like, this card is just way better now, as, again, there are more ways to deal damage and have damage sit on characters. So, yeah, just drop a Rapunzel and draw 3 is extremely strong, not having to wait like Beast Tragic Hero and other things. Scar. Vicious Cheater. This is one I regret not picking up foil for 20 bucks when I had the chance, because it's one of the last foils I need for Rise of the Floodborn. But this card is seeing an increase, kind of like what I mentioned in the Be Prepared slot, because you'd rather play a character than a Be Prepared, because a Be Prepared can be ripped with a Bare Necessities, with an Ursula Deceiver. It's just sitting there as a dead card with waiting to be discarded from general discard from Emerald. And while Scar kind of is the same, because it also is a 7 uninkable, at least it's not getting ripped out of your hand with because it is a character. And so you're seeing some people opt to play 1 to 2 copies of Scar and maybe reduce their Be Prepareds by 1 or 2 in order to offset that. So interesting, but yeah, this card is definitely on the rise. Yeah, it is, because it is played in Sapphire Ruby. It is played in Ruby Amethyst, if you're still on that even now. And it might even be played in Amber Ruby Mufasa to a certain extent, because if you do or do not want to play Be Prepared in that, having a card like this could be pretty relevant. Beast Tragic Heroes, interesting to see here. Still not as low as it was when it was out on release, but it's come down a bit and is slowly tricking back up. I've mentioned this many times already, but this card just gets worse over time, ideally, because there's more, like I mentioned with the Rapunzel, there are more and more ways to deal damage. And so, you know, just having to sit there and having it needing to survive a turn in order for you to get the draw the next turn is still a little risky, or becomes more risky as there's more ways to deal damage. But what I will say is, you know, in certain game states, depending on, again, how the meta evolves, if you top deck this, you and your opponent are in top deck mode, this card could just win you the game because you're drawing 2 every turn and they just don't have an answer. But in a resource-rich game where you have a lot of card draw, where both players' hands are flush with answers, this card will never get its effect off, right? But we're not in that state of a game right now. So depending on the meta, this could shift in or out of the format. It is still a very, very powerful card, and it will likely remain a card that is worth decent money overall, because again, it just gets harder and harder to find. And if you're playing Steel, you likely still play this. There are variants that can cut this from their lists, but it's still just, if you do get the effect off, it could be a game-winning effect in and of itself. This card can single-handedly win you some games just from the sheer fact that drawing, you know, an extra card for 2 turns, you know, that +2 could make all the difference in you winning or losing a game if your opponent doesn't have the answer. One thing I will say too, Hades has really just fallen out of the format completely. It's, I think, at the lowest point it's ever been. Yeah, and so if you don't have this for a collection purpose, it's probably worth picking up at this point, because it might go a little bit lower, but you know, it's hard to see if this card ever comes back into the meta, because there are just better answers or better things to play with Sapphire, especially when you pair it with another ink combination. So it's interesting, but it's unfortunate that Hades was once, you know, a staple in Sapphire, has just been completely power crept out of the game from the Sapphire list. Stitch Carefree Surfer, kind of similar to Hades, almost seems like it's in the same boat. What I will say though is this card has way more applicability and versatility in the game. Like, this card can technically go into any Amber deck, right? Unless you're playing like super low to the ground aggro, but any mid-range to control variant of Amber, even as far as Amber Steel Song, you can play this, and it still represents a tremendous value. It is a huge body that quests for 2, and it is inkable, and it draws you 2 cards. Like, this card is very good still. So I do think it's undervalued where it's at right now. If you don't have these, I would definitely keep an eye on it. It might be at one of its lowest points ever. Yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, I mean, I might even pick up a few extra copies, because I do think this card is very, very good, and it can be played in a number of Amber decks. And I think that's going to be it. Yeah, we're back to the beginning. So a little bit of a longer market watch, but hopefully, you know, if you made it this far, that provided some insights on what I think on the market. Again, this is not financial advice or anything, just my personal opinion. Thank you again for watching, though. Quantum is out.